And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How is it over there on the West Coast?
We got some rain, which again we always like back here. We got some rain. The river, the American River, which is not too far from our house, is doing what it should be and getting very full of our winter water.
Nice,
It is
nice.
good. Yeah. What about you?
Oh, things are going good here. It was cold this morning. We were at 21 degrees when I left the house at 4:30. It was really cold. So, yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was a little chillier than I kind of wanted. Last night I had to move our vehicle and I jumped out and sat in the truck and it was, I think at 28 degrees. I was like, oh man, my butt. Oh, it's cold. So yeah, it's that time of year.
Yeah. So we had such
So,
a really nice time. So our last time, and I'm not sure when this is going to show up in terms of recording, but our last time we had a really great conversation with Melissa
oh,
McNamara about Pilates for kids, which was just super inspiring. And so whether this is coming before or after, if you haven't seen it or it hasn't showed up yet, to keep an eye out for it. If it has showed up already, go back and check that one out. It was really a lot of interesting things were said there. Really appreciated her time with us.
yeah, me too. I mean, I thought it was great. It's something that like we both said, too many times when you work with kids, you automatically assume you can do the same thing with them that you do with adults and just
Right.
expect them to do the same thing. And their brains just aren't wired that way and their bodies aren't wired that way. And
No.
if you expect them to do that, it's not going to work. I remember a client of mine was telling me that he coached two different teams when his kids were young. He taught a boys team and a girls team. He said he learned the girls team, they would sit down and they would watch what he would say and listen
Exactly.
and then do whatever was asked. And the boys team,
Uh-huh.
he realized
Not
he'd
so
have to
much.
make them do 3 or 4 laps. Then they were so
Uh-huh.
tired, they'd sit down and
Uh-huh.
they would listen for about 5 minutes at
For a
the
little
most.
while.
And then he'd have to make them run around some more. So he said, you really have to gauge who you're working with. And these were like 10 to 12-year-olds. And I thought about that when we were talking to Melissa. I was thinking, every kid is different. Every class is going to be different. And
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
way of really making it fun and improvisational and things I thought was just ingenious. So yeah, if you guys haven't
Yeah.
listened to it, go back, listen to it. It's fabulous. Even if you're not into teaching kids, I think it'll also just help you with your own creativity on
Yeah.
working with
It
your
really opened up
clients.
some ideas. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it did for me
she
too.
she talked about movement stories that I think even with one adult client, she took through a whole jump board routine where there was a story attached, like you're climbing up the mountain and then da da da. And it was like, that is so engaging for anybody, whether
Yeah.
you're a kid or you're an adult, just to have something to focus on and almost a narrative approach
Uh-huh.
to your session. It was very cool. It was very
Yeah.
cool. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So that was very cool. And listen, do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe button for whatever platform you decide to use. If you want to watch us, you can do that on YouTube under my name, Brian Ritchie. You can watch us. Last week's, like I said, with Melissa was a lot of fun. You can see her and see us engage with her. That was a lot of fun. So check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram at Moving Convos. And if you want to get in touch with us, movingconvos@gmail.com is the easiest way to reach out and say hi. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics, we love to get new topics because guess what? There are things that we talk about on the regular and they're great topics. But sometimes when someone will ask us something, we'll be like, oh, I never thought about that. But that sounds like that's very cool. So do us a favor. If you have a topic thought, send it to us and we'll consider it and put it in the hopper.
Yeah, we actually had somebody reach out and say, "What about the adductors?" So we'll probably do a whole
Yeah.
session on adducers at some point.
Oh,
And we're also, and right
and
thinking
I'm
about
going to
that,
need
thinking
that. I'm
about.
going to need that very
I was going to
soon.
say Brian is in the middle of that right now.
Yeah, I tore my adductor a couple weeks ago, and it's a slow slog back, man. It really
Yep.
is. So trust me, I'm I'm relearning things that I knew before and picking up new exercises here and there. Going, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about yeah. So I can't wait to discuss that with you and be like, okay, what else can I learn? So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We'll do that in a couple weeks.
Yep.
But
Excellent.
today we're going to go forth a little bit on our low back series. And I know,
Diving still.
yeah, I know. We said we were going to do this like a 4-part, like we had with other body parts. Look, the low back is so intense and there's so much
Yeah.
going on that we decided, you know what? We're going to keep it as an open-ended topic for now, and we're going to do more programming as we go. But we realized that if we limit it to 4, we really can't dive deep on any one subject. We can only get so deep in an hour.
Well, based on our discussion last time, I think we talked about 6 exercises, if I remember right, in an hour. Because a lot of times what we're trying to do is not just, do bridge, do this, do that, but like why? Why are we doing that? What's the purpose
Exactly.
of it? What's the benefit of it? What are the little subtleties that make a difference between having an exercise be just an exercise that I'm doing because my person told me, or an exercise that actually ends up making a big difference in terms of somebody's awareness and their ability to
Mhm.
actually move, because
Yeah.
that's our goal, right?
Yeah. And like I say, there's a lot of topics that we can discuss. I'd love to do one just on neutral spine sometime, because I think that
Hmm.
that's a topic that, if you're new to this, or even if you've been at it for a while, I ask in a lot of my classes, give me the definition of neutral spine. And I hear 4 or 5 different things, if and sometimes
Yes.
more. So I think really diving into that, it wouldn't be a bad idea. And we've covered it sort of roundabout ways, but I think that wouldn't be a bad idea to mention that in a future episode. So stay tuned for that. But today, we wanted to dive a little bit into mobility, spinal mobility, because we talked a little bit about stability last time, and we'll be doing
Mhm.
more as we get into exercise programming for different conditions. But let's talk about mobility a little bit.
So one of the things that we know about low back pain is, yes, stability. And what I would say is the reason I often start with stability, I think Brian does as well, is also
Mhm.
to talk about awareness. Is where
Yep.
is my body? What hurts? What doesn't hurt? If I'm in this position, it's better. Like that's really where we start, is just understanding that. And that's easier to be done from a stability place. If you
Yep.
start out with stretching and movement, that's more dynamic. People don't always have as good an idea about what they're feeling or what that means. And people can often move in a bigger range than maybe wise for them at that time, and not even know it until later. So that's why we think about mobility, and we think about spinal mobility. Now, we've talked a bit already about discs and stenosis and things like that, and whether you're being aware or cautious of extension, if there's something more bony going on, like osteoarthritis or stenosis,
Mhm.
or whether you're thinking about maybe being cautious with flexion if there's something more disky going on. So, with those caveats as our foundation, we've also found that for many clients, like they're just stiff, like they're
Yeah.
just kind of right. They've been
Yep.
sitting for a long time, or they have a sport that is very particular in the low back. I think of a lot of my friends are cyclists, and that is a very particular low back position to be in for a long time for many of
Mhm.
them. And a lot of them, ride 2 or 3 hours a day. And so whether it's a habit, or whether it's an activity, or whether it's just how you sit at your desk or sit all day in the car, those can both make your back really stiff in ways that sometimes just mobility can make all the difference. So that's kind of what I want to talk about it as well.
Well, something you said to me, we talked about it when I tore my so story was this, tore my hamstring, tore my adductor. I was just stretching. I did a stretch that I do. I must have done this stretch a million times in my career. It's not a big deal. Spread your legs wide, hinge forward from the hips. I was just stretching, getting ready to do some adductor work anyway. And I heard a loud pop. I went down, tore the adductor at the adductor tubercle above the knee, and then the hamstring at the issue tuberosity. But what's something that you told me, because I was trying to think, oh, I need to rehab this, I need to get back. This was before I actually went into the orthopedist and realized how serious it was. I thought I just pulled a muscle. Is you said you need to let this heal. You need to not focus on stretching. You need to really let this knit together,
Mhm.
and then once it's healed, it's going to be tight. You're going to need to work on stretching. You're going to need to work on that. And I think the low back is very similar, because I was thinking about this with
Yeah.
a client this week. Is She was coming back from a disc issue from the past, and she had some back stuff, but her range of motion was getting much better, was getting okay, but she was still stiff and tight. So we started doing a little bit more mobility work, even though it was a little bit more disc oriented at the beginning. She was stable now.
Yeah.
So I said, now we have to work on getting you to move better and
Yep.
slowly increase that mobility of the spine, not jumping in, not trying to get her to do these huge movements, but
Mm-mm.
slowly beginning to think about, okay, let's have a little bit more movement side to side. Let's explore at what you can do safely,
Mhm.
where you're guarded still, etc. So you
Yeah.
really sort of ignited that in my brain to realize, oh yeah, there's that aspect of it too. Not just the stability part, but we really need to bring in the mobility part when they're ready.
So thinking about that, again, the primary challenges for the spine often are extreme flexion and extreme extension.
Yeah.
Right. And extreme can be a lot of things for different people. It can be really a huge range. It can be a smaller range. But basically, the end ranges of flexion and extension are often where we think about being problematic and the places that we kind of want to minimize or avoid or limit it for a period of time if there's back pain. One of the things that I often will start with is gentle rotation and supported lateral flexion.
Mhm.
So in other words, like just a tiny, like I'm just doing it now, if you're on the video, just a little tiny bit of side to side or a little tiny bit of rotation with, generally when I'm doing rotation, when I start with a client, I'm having them do it in a relatively safe environment. Like one of the things
Mhm.
Brian and I both use for mobility is an all fours sequence. Where we do kind of a cat cow, we do some rotation, we do a little bit of lateral flexion, because it's a pretty safe position. The
Mhm.
client's absolutely in control of everything. Their hands are kind of closed chain with hands and knees in that case.
Yep.
And so they can only move the spine as much as they're comfortable with. And so that's often what I think about is let's just gently try to get some mobility going in rotation or lateral flexion. And sometimes I'll start with that before I do flexion and extension. In fact, I usually
Mhm.
start with that first because those are often, if they're done in a very safe environment, they're often safer and they often will get me the mobility that I want without directly irritating bones and joints. Maybe, right? Maybe. You never know
Yep.
about those things. You got to be careful.
Well,
But
one thing you and I have talked about is in quadruped position. The body, I'm not going to call it unweighted, but unlike having them be in a supine position doing a curl where they're lifting
mhm.
their body weight, where that could provide a lot of compression with the spine, that could really possibly bother, a spinal injury of some sort or a low back pain. When you're on all fours and go into the flexion or an extension and lateral flexion, you're not under a lot of load. It's not a
Right.
load-less position, but it's a reduced load position,
Mhm.
and being in that reduced load type of position allows a client to feel safe because they're not trying to lift a lot of weight. They're not trying to move their
Yeah.
body through an
Mm-mm.
uncomfortable range of motion, and they can explore that in tucking their tailbone, flattening their back, arching their back, and you're gonna see where do they feel comfortable? What's scary?
Yeah.
Working
Exactly.
lateral flexion. What does feel frightening about those positions? Or
Yeah.
does it like, "Oh, yeah, this works real well," and you'll see sometimes they'll do one side, uh, "Oh, yeah, this is easy. I can do this." And you can see their body begin to relax a little bit, and then they start getting a little bit more of that movement. And I think that that's important for us is getting them to be able to move pain-free, but also in a relaxed state.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I often do again in that all fours position is I'll do what we call tail wag. This is actually a
Mhm.
Feldenkrais exercise. Or in all fours, you bend one knee, keeping both knees on the ground, and that foot that's off the floor now becomes your tail. You basically swing it from side to side, which is a very gentle version of a lateral flexion. And so many clients are terrified of like a seated lateral flexion because there's a lot of weight, right? That comes if you're
Mhm.
just kind of leaning over to one side, that can be a lot of stress. But in the
Yep.
all fours position, that isn't true. So I kind of sneak that into people. I can just give them you just do this, lying on fours, lift your foot up, rotate from side to side. And they don't even realize they're doing lateral flexion, but they start to get
Yeah.
some confidence in it. They find the comfortable range that they can support because again, it is relatively unloaded. It's really
Mhm.
pretty relatively unloaded. And they just get some nice mobility going. And then they can start to have some more confidence that if they're seated up, for example, with one hand on their desk and just lean over, but with their hand for support or the other hand for support, those can be some simple ways to start to approach moving the spine more.
Yeah. One thing that I love to utilize is a ball or
Mm-hmm.
even a togu ball,
Mm-hmm.
sitting on it, a large, like you could even use a Pilates ball for some of our smaller instructors out there. I'm not a small person. Sorry, I'm not. So I need something a little larger, or a large gym ball or something like that, sitting on it and just doing hip movement from side to side, little hip
Mm-hmm.
shift side to side, forward and back, real gentle, small
Yep.
ranges of motion. I love the hula. Coming from Hawaii, I
Yep.
love the hula. So I'll have them do little circles, and you can see it's engaging their core. They're engaging their core in a way that's different. They're seated
Yep.
upright, so they're not
Yep.
leaning over necessarily. Whereas, like you said, if I'm leaning over to the side right now, my quadratus lumborum, my obliques are holding me up.
Yep. And they're often like, ugh, doing a little extra.
Exactly.
I'm holding you. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. Right. And that can create
Exactly.
some pain and tension. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're sitting on the ball and just doing a little bit of hip shift from side to side, it's comfortable. It doesn't feel threatening the same way as necessarily leaning over might. Just like if someone's
Right.
sitting in a chair and you tell them, okay, lean over and touch your toes after back pain, you see this look in their eyes like, oh, I can't, I don't know if I can
Yeah.
do that. But if you say, I just want you to tuck your tailbone under an inch and
Yeah.
then tuck it the other
Exactly.
way 1 inch and do it. And I've used Dynadiscs, I've used other things, anything that they could sit on that has a little bit of movement. Sometimes I've even, used like a standing wobble board, you
Mm-hmm.
know, for that we usually use for ankle work, and just have them go side to side and feel that buoyancy. And I love to use the word buoyancy. Feel that buoyancy. Now, like you're on a boat, just gentle side to side, just let it flow. Just rock it side to side. And you'll see they'll go, oh, yeah, I can do this. Then do circles. Oh, okay, I can do this. And just that little bit, again, it's not a lot of resistance, and I don't want it to be. I want to explore that range of motion, and then it can get larger as they become more confident and they, increase, strength and flexibility.
Right. And even in supine, just to do simple pelvic tilts, right? Or
Yes.
if this is basically like we talk about the pelvic clock is a common Pilates
Mm-hmm.
exercise. Done supine where you tip your tailbone, posterior anterior tilt and then side to side or circles. And that's another way to do it is to do it supine or do it seated. And both of them are just that idea of starting the movement from the bottom rather than
Mm-hmm.
from the top.
Yep.
Right? Which I think I just want to pull that out of that because when you start the movement from the top, like I'm doing a side bend with my sit bones anchored, that's going to often create let those muscles get a little stressed. Whereas if I'm doing it from the bottom, it's often gentler and a little bit more subtle. And they can also feel it, like, can feel that their sacrum moving. If they're supine, or if they're seated, shift your weight to the right sit bones, shift your weight to the left sit bone, go a little bit in front of the sit bones, move a little bit behind the sit bones. You're going to really minimize the amount of movement that they do.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a mental component as well. Anybody who's had back pain, that you're going to sit very rigid because if I stay here and I don't move a muscle, nothing's going to hurt. And then you ask them to lean forward, lean backward, lean side to side. That provides sometimes a little bit of fear because
Yeah.
those muscles and those muscles are going to register that fear and
Yeah.
hold on tight. I got to hold it. Whereas if you
Exactly.
do it from the bottom, it changes the way they're thinking. So they could say, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do this. And so what do you mean tuck your tailbone? Just tuck it. Okay. And then back. Oh, okay. I'm even doing it in the chair right now as I'm sitting here. It's like, oh, it's an inch or an inch or two.
Yeah.
They don't register it the same way as lean forward, lean back,
At
lean
all.
sideways.
No.
It's a
At
different
all. It's
mental
it's
thought.
it's it's much safer. They
Yeah.
feel like they're in control of it or something. It also starts to look at that integration of the legs, the pelvis, and the spine, which is often somewhere in that chain is where things are not working well. Either the pelvis
Yep.
isn't moving right, or the femurs aren't working well, or the spine isn't, or some combination of all those.
Yep.
Again, rather than starting from the top where you've got a much more mobility.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always interesting when working on mobility, I find with clients to get them to relax, to trust, and to sort of allow their body to move again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because and I've been guilty of this when my back's gone out on me. I immediately hold on. And
You
over the
brace.
years, yeah,
Yep.
and over the years, I also know my body and understanding anatomy like we do. I know what might throw me out, so I avoid those motions and some exercises that might put me in those positions. It's kind of like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable doing that. I'm going to avoid that. And there's a million exercises in the world. I can do that. But for our clients that don't know that, they don't understand what they can and can't do. A lot of them just brace in every single position and don't really allow their body to relax and move naturally again. And I think that's a big thing we need to think about.
I think about one client, and the other thing too that I've seen a lot, both in Pilates and in really anybody with back pain, as Brian was just mentioning, is that desire to brace is pretty innate. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just not going to move it because if I move it in any direction, it might hurt. Right? Just that fear comes up. And I'm thinking about one client who was going to see a different practitioner, and that practitioner was basically having her take very small steps because any bigger step, or this is what she said, and I have no idea if I doubt the practitioner really said it this way, to be honest with you, right? Little tiny steps, like barely 1 foot in front of the other in terms of a gait distance. And so she came in and she was like walking. I'm like, why are you walking like that? She said, well, that's the only way, my last practitioner said that was the only way that my back wouldn't hurt. And I'm like, okay.
Hard to
And
go
it was
through
just
life.
very hard. Like then your whole life is. I mean, she looked like a geisha. Like imagine a geisha
I was
walking,
just
with a
thinking
really
that.
tight
Yeah.
skirt, or it was just funny. And so I said, okay, well, let's just think about letting that be a little bit easier. And she also had stopped moving her arms, right? Because when you're taking small
Yeah.
steps, you typically don't move your arms. So she'd really like her entire pelvis and spine and torso were locked, basically.
Yep.
And so what I worked on with her was just having her gently swing the arms in opposition to the leg. And that was completely arbitrary for her for a while. It was like my left arm's going forward and my right leg's going forward. Like she had to pretty much say it that way. And then we just slowly started to have just that light swing and sway of the torso with the arms. And then she could start to get the distance a little bit longer in her gait. But it really, like, walking was an interesting way to work with it for her because that was where her bracing was really showing up.
Yeah. I find that that's very common. I can't tell you
Yeah.
how robotic some people come in and you watch them. I think we've talked about when we talked about assessments, after I do the assessment in here, I say, we're going to go out on the main floor and I walk behind them. And I just sort of point, after you, my friend, and let them walk. And I'm watching them. I'm watching everything they do. And
Yeah.
how many people never turn their shoulders, arms stay by
Nope.
their side. If they swing their
Yep.
arms, it's from the elbows. It's
Right.
not
And it's
from
and it's usually really small. Yeah.
really small.
There's no torso reaction.
Yeah, and there's, like you said, a smaller gate, so they're not getting any pelvic movement or very little
Right.
pelvic movement. They're definitely not
Yep.
getting their glutes engaged. And
Yep.
you're watching this, you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, you don't move." And I've actually used the term robotic to people and said,
Mhm.
"You move a little robotically." And they go, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well," and I'll have them watch themselves in the mirror and they go, "Oh yeah." So sometimes pointing that out to them, or like you said, just having them begin something small, like lengthen your stride by a couple of inches. Or I want you just to think about swinging your arms. And what I'll often tell them, and I don't know if you do this, is I want you to swing your arms bigger than normal. And
Right.
what I
Right. Just a
find is
little
that it
exaggeration.
it might be normal and it may not even hit what we would consider normal. But to them, it's these
Exactly.
huge swings. But really, to me, it's like, okay, you're getting close. You're getting close to normal. Your shoulders are moving a little bit now.
And often too, I find that if they've been bracing for a long time, they've lost that contralateral ability.
Yeah.
So they'll actually have the right leg and the right arm will both go forward at the same time and
Yep.
the other way. So they can't even get that rhythm of that. And all of those things, to take this back to a discussion we had as part of the fascia courses, was the thoracolumbar fascia is this fascia that goes, runs through the back from our lat through the opposite glute on either side. It's like a big X in the back of our body. And that is a lot of where we drive our movement from, is this kind of rotational component through that thoracolumbar fascia. And when you stiffen up that entire back body, very common in back pain, you lose, well, so many things, but you really lose the dynamic nature of all those tissues in the back of the body, which leads them to get stiffer, which leads them to get more fibrous, which decreases their ability to really nourish and nurture the spine and take care of it well. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing about walking is like walking is just the classic way that we get a little bit of dynamic action through that whole back body system, which is really, really helpful.
And you said something that I want to sort of point out a little bit is the fibrousness of that tissue when it's not utilized, when it's not used.
Mhm.
I was mentioning, I'm waiting for, my hamstrings. They've kind of knitted very well. Everything feels good for my hamstrings. My adductor, not so much yet. But when that happens, things are tightening up. You're creating little bitty scars. And
Yes.
if you've had back pain and you don't move and you're holding yourself tight, that thoracolumbar fascia is going to begin to tighten up and it's going to
Mhm.
cinch up and it's going to become much more fibrous. And you can go back
Mhm.
into our talk about that. It was last year sometime. And when it becomes more fibrous like that, that can lead to lifelong low back, I'm going to say stiffness that
Mhm.
they can't really move. I mean, how many of us have had a client where you try to get them to do a pelvic tilt? And I'm thinking mostly my men, and you're trying to get them to do a pelvic tilt and they cannot for the life of them even move their spine. I mean, that does happen. And it takes a while to begin to get them to be able to move properly through their low back and get some flexibility there.
Yeah, that protective quality is really profound. I had one client who had a low back issue, um, and for whatever reason, basically went to bed for a year, just stopped
Mm-hmm.
moving. And I was working with her years after that, and she was permanently disabled just from essentially my take on it was she had just allowed whatever damage had happened in her spine and in the tissues around it, really the whole back
Mm-hmm.
body to fiber up. And so I mean, when she leaned forward, she could barely touch her knees. Like that was how little
Wow.
forward flexion she had, just because again she had let those tissues completely atrophy,
Mm-hmm.
and the muscle tissue, which was dynamic and juicy and all that, be replaced by essentially collagen and fibrous tissue. Um, and that was a tough one. Like that was going to take forever to
Mm-hmm.
really get that back, and it was hard to get back for her.
Yeah. When people do that used to be the go-to. If someone had low
Mhm.
back
Yeah,
pain,
yeah,
60s, 70s, even through the 80s, before physical therapy became sort of a thing, someone hurt their back, lay down, go to bed, don't move. It'll heal. You got to let it calm down or wear your back brace, which doesn't allow you to move, period.
right, exactly, and lets your muscles atrophy in the process.
Right. But then they don't move. And I can't tell you how many clients I've had where they said, oh yeah, I hurt myself, now my 40 years ago or whatnot. But they say, oh yeah, so I just stayed in bed for 3 weeks. Like, you what? You stayed in bed for
Mhm.
3 weeks? Oh yeah, and eventually
Mhm.
calmed down. I said, well, it would have calmed down anyway. I mean, that's just time and healing
Yeah,
process.
exactly. Yeah.
But that could be why I'm seeing what I'm seeing in your body today, your movement patterns. And especially those who have had back problems, the tightness in the hamstrings, the erectors, the hips, all of that gets so tight and bound up. And it's hard to get that to move again.
So thinking about mobility, right, for the low back, we've talked around about a little bit about
Mhm.
lateral flexion, a little bit about just getting some gentle mobility going in terms of lateral flexion and rotation, which we work on a lot. Now, the other things that are important to work on, or at least to assess and understand, is hip mobility,
Yes.
particularly in really in all directions, but particularly in hip flexion. So, what is our hamstring range like?
Yep.
In hip extension, so what is their hip flexor range like? The iliopsoas and the rest of their hip flexors, and then also I find that the piriformis or the external rotation are all things that I just look at because very often, if I've got somebody with a low back problem and they've done what we're just talking about, which is kind of like stiffen up for a while, then what I find happens is if they lose that hip mobility, then the spine starts to take the motion. So in other
Mm-hmm.
words, if they don't have hip extension, for example, because they're really tight in the front of their hips, then that extension is going to go into their back instead. They're going to basically be extending their spine every time they try to walk forward and move their leg behind them because they don't have the hip range of motion.
Yep.
Same thing with a tight hamstring. If the hamstrings are super, super short, then let's say they're leaning over to put on their shoes. If you want to keep the back relatively neutral, you've got to stay relatively flat backed, right? Whatever neutral spine means. Again, another discussion for another day. So if I lean over and I can flex at the hips because my hamstrings have enough length, that's great. If I get to the point where my hamstrings don't have the length, then I'm going to flex.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to have to do that. And that may put stress. If I'm lifting something up off the floor and I don't bend my knees, right, I'm going to be rounding in my back. And that's going to put stress, a deep amount of stress into the lumbar and into the low back and the tissues around it, not just the vertebra.
Yeah. Hip rotation is something that I look at a lot with these clients as well.
Mhm.
And even just in a supine position, letting the leg rotate out to the side without the pelvis joining it is so
Mhm. Yeah.
challenging
Little knee
because,
flops, right? Side to
yeah,
side. Yeah.
yeah, because one knee will drop out to the side and you'll watch their pelvis will twist toward it. And
Yep.
it's And again, the lumbar spine doesn't have a whole lot of rotation. So basically, you're saying, oh, hips, you're designed to rotate, but we're not going to let you. So guess what? I'm going to ask your lumbar spine to twist instead. So that it
He doesn't want to
becomes a
do.
little bit of an issue, which it doesn't want to do and it's not supposed to do. And it becomes, this catch 22. I often sort of joke that, look, our back becomes the thing that wants to help everything. I call it Santa's little helper. It wants to help everything. So if I try to rotate my hip and my hip joint is like, oh, I'm a little gunked up and I don't want to do that. Don't worry, I got it. Low back's here. I'll move for you. You can't, I can't do the
Yeah.
hip flexion. Don't worry, I got this. Hamstrings are tight. I can bend. And it's not designed for necessarily that in those ways. And we need
Mhm.
to, like you said, focus on those other joints as well and those other muscles to get them to work and to get them to remember what their job is so that the lumbar spine can do its job.
One other thing that you mentioned early on that I want to bring up here is when I'm working on mobility with these clients, I'm thinking of it as mobility, not stretching.
Mhm.
And again, there's a lot of discussion about what those two things mean. But when I'm thinking about mobility for these clients, I'm thinking of let's find a very comfortable range of motion that moves you towards your end range and then back away from your end range and towards your end range and back away from your end range. This
Mhm.
is not, for most of my low back clients, I'm not going to do something like, let's say, put a strap around their foot and have them pull that leg up for a hamstring stretch and then hold that at the end range for like 30 seconds, 45
Mhm.
seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. I'm not going to have them do that necessarily. I might have them say, okay, let's just move into the stretch and then move out of the stretch. And just, very slowly and carefully get that going. Because a lot of it is I want them to be aware of just getting the joint moving, getting the muscle
Mhm.
moving. And I call it warning the muscle, like, okay, just open and close and open and close and open and close. And oftentimes from that gentle movement in and out of range and not even to end range, you can get the best results in terms of being comfortable with it and not causing any more trouble from the stretching, right? Or from the mobility work.
And we both know that end range is where injuries are often more likely to happen. So if I try and take them to the
Yeah.
end range with every repetition, it's more likely that that's where your body's going to grab hold and try and seize up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, again, I tell them, I want you to
Yeah,
explore this
exactly.
range. So
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna just go with what you feel comfortable, and then I'll say, can you do another inch, another centimeter, and just get them to think about that and say, I don't care how far you go today, don't care. And then when they're comfortable with it, they say, can you do another inch? Oh, you can. Cool. Again, it's exploring that range of motion and exploring that range of motion, like you said, in sort of a rhythmic pattern, because
Mm-hmm.
the body does like rhythm. So if you can get into that rhythmic pattern sometimes and explore that range of motion a little bit, you're going to see that they're going to relax a little bit more.
You're also finding comfort and confidence in movement.
Mhm.
Right, if you find something that's like very like it feels easy to them, but they're going farther than they had before. That's where you create comfort and confidence. And in terms of low back stuff, I find like the image is almost like there's a bubble around them. Okay. There's like this bubble of limitations around them. Like I don't do
Mm,
this and I don't do that. And I don't do this and I don't move there. And no. Right. And a lot of times my job or how I see my job is I'm trying to increase the size of that bubble. So they're a
nice.
little more confident moving forward. They're a little more confident rotating to the right. They're a little more confident reaching across themselves. They're a little more confident walking, a little more confident getting up and down from sitting, a little more confident rolling over in bed, right? Like I'm just trying to expand that bubble of limitation. And that's done through confidence and through time and
Uh-huh.
through repetition, right? Somebody does something enough times and it doesn't bother them. It's like, oh, okay, that proves to them it's safe. Because with low back stuff, you've got to prove to them that it's safe. You can talk to them all you want, but until they've had that
Absolutely.
experience of like, oh yeah, I just leaned down and picked that thing up off the floor and my back didn't hurt. That's the proof. The proof is in the
Yep.
pudding for sure, right?
Yep. When you were explaining that, the image that came into my head was a mime in a box.
Yeah,
You know, that
exactly.
the
Yeah.
box can get smaller around
Tiny
the
box,
mime,
right?
or you can start pushing that box a little bit bigger in all different directions. And that image was in my head. I was like, I kind of like that image. That's kind of, you know, but that's really what we're doing. We are exploring those ranges of motion of comfort and getting them to be able to, like you said, move more effectively, more efficiently, and be able
Mhm.
to translate that into something like, okay, pick that up off the floor or roll over in bed without pain, which is huge for some people. For some people, it's
Yeah,
taking care of personal matters in the restroom, that things like that maybe
right.
they're not able to. And anybody who's worked with the seniors will tell you when they're limited to range of motion, oh my gosh, those things that we take for granted can become really
Yeah.
seriously, oh wow, how do I do all of that? And
Yep.
yeah, so getting them to be able to do things naturally and comfortably is a huge thing. And pushing, like you said, pushing those boundaries a little bit, small, 1 inch at a time sometimes, but getting them more comfortable doing it. And that is the proof.
Stretching them.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, the proof
Mhm.
is in the pudding. And
Yeah.
I will, like you, I discuss this as mobility versus flexibility because I
Mhm.
do believe that flexibility is important and we can do that. But a lot of times when they come to me, and I'm sure when they come to you, they're given exercises from a PT, a chiropractor, a doctor, and it shows the hamstring stretch. It
Yeah.
shows knee to chest. And those are
Yep.
fabulous stretches. Don't get me wrong. I think they're great things to have the client do. But I also think sometimes pushing those end ranges of motion to the point of discomfort can be counterproductive, especially at the early set, early on
Mhm.
into, the issue. Whereas exploring a comfortable range of motion of bringing your chest in, knee into the chest and just hold it for 1 second and put it down, then do the other side, knee in and then put it down. And exploring it that way rather than hold it, pull it in tighter, tighter,
Squeeze.
squeeze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah. So I think that's so when you think about that, I'm thinking about again gentle mobility in low back with rotations, with lateral flexion, maybe some gentle flexion and extension. Generally, when if I'm introducing that, I introduce it in cat cow.
mhm.
Yeah, just in all fours because I find that's where people. I've never had a client who couldn't do that. Actually, all my
Yeah.
low back clients, they may limit their own range to what they're comfortable with.
Mhm.
So they may like barely go into extension or barely go into flexion, but then they're really in charge. They're in control, and there's lots of research that says that the most successful things that work on low back pain are things that increase that sense of confidence and comfort
Yes.
gradually over time. That there's a huge mental component here, and there's a huge emotional component to any kind of low
Mhm.
back pain. And the more you can create, like, oh look at what look what you could do. Like you couldn't do that last week, and now you're able to do that without pain or with a
Yep.
whole lot less pain.
Yep.
And so with mobility, it's like that slow exploratory, what works, what doesn't work, how do I find the range that works for me? And one other thing is if you're doing mobility work with a client, I always give them, if that's my focus for a period of time, I'll say, okay, I want you to do this every day if you can. And it may be
Mhm.
5 minutes or
Yeah.
whatever, one or two things, maybe three things at the most. But I want them to do that every day because my experience too, especially as people get older, but with everybody, is if you do mobility work once a week, you aren't even maintaining.
No.
Right, you're really not. Whatever kind of mobility work you're doing, it really does take regular practice of that. So I try to find like, Brian sitting on the ball, just do that every day. Like give
Mhm.
him a small ball or have him have a physio ball or whatever, just do that every day. Or whatever the things are that really work for that client. Maybe they need to do a hip flexor stretch. Maybe they need to do a hamstring stretch. Maybe they need to do
Yep.
a form 4 stretch or performance stretch. But have them say, okay, so really commit to doing this at least 3 or 4 times a week. Give them every day, and they'll usually end up with 3 or 4
Yep,
times a week,
exact human
right?
nature. Absolutely. Now, something that I wanna mention here, when we're talking about having someone do like the cat and cow, uh, type of thing, quadruped position, remember that everybody's body is different and that what you're looking at, you may not see them go into much extension. To them,
Right.
that may be a lot of extension that they may be like, "Wow, I really feel like I'm arching my back big," and I'm looking at them thinking, "Really?
Right.
You're barely flat at this point."
Right, right,
They
right.
could so one direction may be limited to the point that their brain is telling them that that's what they're able to do. Don't force them.
No,
And also, I'm gonna put this in here, don't make them feel bad for not being able to,
absolutely
because
not.
they're just doing what their body's allowing them to do. And I speak from experience. When I do the cat and cow, I'm great in flexion, in extension. I have some, but it's not a ton in comparison to a lot of Pilates instructors out there that I work with that, oh my gosh, their flexion extension because they're former dancers is a lot. I'm not a former dancer. You know, my stock was, moving livestock. That's where I come from is, working out in the fields. So I'm a little bit more, a little less flexible in that sense, especially going into extension. So don't make them wrong about it. Just allow them to be where they're at and explore that range of motion. And if they're comfortable with it, maybe go a little bit further, but just realize that you can do this on 10 people and you're going to see 10 different things.
Yeah, exactly. So and you've got to listen, you've got to just see what their responses are. And a lot of it is creating that comfort and that confidence.
Yeah.
So, exploring what does that feel like? There is no goal for any of this, right? Really keep the goals out of their mind. It's just, move that area regularly.
Yep.
If somebody is something like a driver, drives a lot or sits a lot, I'll try to give them things to do in their car or at their desk, even if they're just little things. Say, okay, so set your alarm for every hour, and then I want you to at least get up and walk around if that's appropriate, or move your arms, just swing your arms, or take a little bit of a rotation, or
Yep.
whatever it is. I'll give them a couple of things to do, and like we've talked about before, I often have to tell them when in their day let's strategize when in the day you're going to do these things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's first thing in the morning, maybe it's last thing at night, maybe it's once you get to your office, whatever it is. And that's why I give them things to do when they're brushing their teeth, they're waiting for their coffee, or in their car, or at their desk,
Yep.
or when they're watching TV. So there's lots of options and places where they can put this into what they're doing.
Yep. Yep. Creating a ritual or ritualistic activity. I do that a
Mm-hmm.
lot with my shoulder clients that I need to have them do like a doorway
Mm-hmm.
stretch of some sort because they're not going to
Right,
stretch on their own. So I'll say every
right.
time at home that you go to the restroom when you're walking coming out of it, because often the bathroom doors are a little more narrow than the rest of the house. They're not
Uh-huh.
necessarily as wide. So I'll say, that's when I want you to do it. And it becomes that ritual that, oh, okay, I'm walking out and they are able to
Nice.
do that. Uh, Different exercises I've done with different people in that sense. And that really does create that ritual that they feel comfortable with and that they know when to do it. An exercise that I love throwing at people. Uh, Rotation, as we both know, you get some thoracic rotation. A lot of times that gets the low back to relax a little bit. There's a lot of evidence that shows that people who have low back pain often don't rotate well through their thoracic
Yep,
spine.
yep.
So getting them to rotate is fabulous. But even in a quadruped position sometimes, or a supine position, it can be bothersome. I love the one that you did where you're literally just twisting your torso and letting your arms sort of flop. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
But I find with that one, it almost doesn't feel like enough for clients so that they don't feel like they're really exercising. That I love reach and pull. So I will either give them a band and have them hook it around a doorknob or something and just have them, pull with one arm as they twist and reach with the other hand forward and then go back and forth and allow their body just to sort of swing and sway comfortably, and either standing, seated, whatever they feel comfortable doing. And even if they're taking a walk, I'll just have them do a reach and pull motion, reach and pull, reach and pull. And I say not the whole time, but do it for, 10 or 15 repetitions and let it go, 10 or 15 repetitions and let it go. And I find that reach and pull motion gets them to think that it is an exercise. So they feel I'm exercising, but also it gets that thoracic rotation in a very gentle way because they think they're working their arms.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize that really I'm working their spine. I'm really trying to get that. And that reach and pull also gives that rhythmic sense. They feel a rhythm to it.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Exactly. And that's where, again, you're getting nourishment in the low back. You're getting some stimulation. What I think about rotation when I'm thinking about the low back is rotation stimulates all of the joints in the spine, right? It gets the facet joints moving against each other. It gets the vertebra moving against each other. It gets the discs gently doing that sponging thing we've talked about, I think, before, where, when you rotate, you kind of squeeze it. And when you come back to center, it opens it up. So you're like squeezing the fluid out and opening it back up, nourishing the discs. It also stimulates all of the muscles around the spine from the deepest level all the way out. And then going even into the superficial, thoracolumbar fascia on the lats, like all the pieces get stimulated. And a lot of times when we're trying to re-educate the low back, we're trying to get that glide between all the tissues again. We're trying to get the coordination of the joints and the muscles to all work together. And that's what takes some time. Yeah. But that's a really nice, nice way to do that. Either just passively like I do, or I just rotating. But the other thing too that I work on a lot is, and this is specifically geared towards Pilates teachers, is a lot of the rotation that we do in Pilates involves the hips steady and the torso rotating. So you think about saw, or you think about spine twist, right? That's oftentimes the focus. One of the things that I like to do for my low back clients is not, at least initially, to isolate the rotation in the thorax or in the torso, but to include the hips in it. So that's where just that standing, even if I'm doing a push-pull, it's like I'm letting the hips go with it so that my hip drives forward and that rotates me, to the opposite side, and my hip drives forward. And I'll even have them drive from the hips sometimes and let the spine just follow that, because that's often where the mobility is lacking, is in that ability of the hips to do the part that they need to do in that whole chain.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I was working with a client with that just yesterday, and doing that because I had them using a band, and I said, take your feet a little wider and I want you to get your hips involved with it. I want you to turn, and it became almost a dance. I said, and what I like to do is change their focal point. So I'll say, now think about moving from your shoulder blades, move your scapula, initiate from there. Now initiate from your hips. Now initiate from here. And when you change that initiation, the muscles, they're still doing the same motion, but they're changing a little bit on what's firing first and what's firing second. And I like to change that up. It's a good way just to clear their head a little bit. And there's times when you'll see a hiccup, a hitch in their giddy up when they're doing something where it doesn't look fluid and you're thinking, what's wrong? But if you change how they initiate, suddenly it becomes smoother. And I've seen that a number of times where I'll change it and say, okay, I want you to move from your shoulders rather than from your hips. And suddenly it looks a little smoother, or vice versa. And then I'll have them sort of integrate that a little bit, and we can see, oh, okay, here's what we might be missing. So sometimes you'll be able to see different things when you change that initiation.
Absolutely. And that's a fun thing for them too, because then you can discover where they move and where they don't move. Right. And try to get some mobility in places that they aren't usually working.
Yeah.
So thinking about this, I'm just kind of, maybe it's time to wrap this up, but just thinking about, we've wandered in many different directions here. So one of the things we think about with mobility is, what I find we're often trying to do is reignite or reintroduce the body to normal mobility.
Yeah.
which is a lot of times just that simple. And I think of just the simple rotation of walking as part of that, right? That slight hip rotation, slight spine rotation, slight shoulder movement. It's not big. None of those rotations are big, but
Mhm.
that's a lot of times what gets blocked down into that little mind box, right? They just stop moving. So
Mhm.
thinking about, we're trying to regain that through the whole system, the spine, the shoulders, the pelvis, the legs, the hips, all of those pieces. And doing that through exploration, through gentle movement, through mobility that is more focused on just the movement going back and forth, and is on stretching or holding or pulling, finding confidence, and then gently increasing that ability to move in those comfortable areas. Playing with that from the pelvis first. So, Brian's whole idea, like working on the ball or doing a little pelvic clock, playing with that
Mhm.
mobility from the pelvis up is often a nice way to start rather than the top down because of the weight of the upper body. And then just finding things that they can do regularly, finding the 2 or 3 things that really bring them some relief and making that part of their routine. So those
Yeah.
are some key things I want to think about. And then hip flexion, hip extension, like the whole hip piece as well.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you said I always give homework uh, because I want to give them the responsibility for the body that they live in.
Mm-hmm.
So having them be able to do this at home. And like you said, I'll tell them, do it every day because I know they're never going to do it every day. But if you say do
Right.
it, if you say 3 times a week, you'll be lucky to get once. If you
Yep.
say do it every day, you'll get 3 or 4 times a week.
Right.
And then it's our responsibility to ask when they come in, did you do your
Did you
homework?
do that? Right. Are you doing your homework? Any questions? Anything you need to know?
And what I'll do is a lot of times I'll say, show me what you're doing. Because we all
Yeah.
know clients
Always.
make the exercise their own. And suddenly you're like, I don't remember giving you that. I don't even know what that is. But that's okay. Let's tighten that up a little bit. Don't make them wrong. Just say, well, that's an interesting way of doing that. Let's adjust that a little bit. Let's fine tune. And a lot of times what I'll say is it's kind of like rabbit ears on an old TV. First you get the picture and then you do the fine tuning. We're going to fine tune now. And they go, oh, okay. You don't necessarily make it wrong. We're still adjusting the picture, but we want to tell them we're making those fine tuning. And by having them do that and do it at home on a regular basis, they get more confidence in what they're doing and they get more confidence in moving. And I think that's so important.
The other thing I want to say about the fine tuning is I've had many clients come to me who says, "Oh yeah, well my chiropractor or my PT or somebody gave me these exercises that I've been doing at home." Always review those exercises with your client.
Oh, yeah.
And right. And with that, like rather than going, oh my God, your PT is an idiot. They have no idea what's happening, which I've heard Pilates teachers say. I'm sure you've
Uh-huh.
heard personal trainers say that.
Oh,
Like you
yeah.
have no idea what that person told them to do and how it was interpreted and how it has changed over time. They have no idea.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, well, that sounds great. That sounds really useful. Let's just, again, fine tune. Let's just see if we can make this a little more effective for you. Is it working for you? Always review that home program. Always
Always.
review every exercise in that home program. And then if you've given them something, review that for several sessions until you're pretty confident that they're
Yes.
actually doing it correctly. And feel free to video it. Like I'll often say, hey, let's
Mhm.
just video you doing this. You've got a record of what we're looking at.
Yep.
Whatever helps, because it's important that they have that confidence and that you don't degrade somebody who may have given them other exercises because you really don't have any idea what that chain of communication was.
And remember, especially with physical therapy, they have very limited amount of time with each person. So a lot of
Right.
times they're handing someone, here's your
They got the
exercises.
pamphlet. Yeah, you got the pamphlet.
Yeah. And you'll go over
Right.
it once and say, here you go, do this every day or do this
Right.
3 times a week. And then they're on to the next thing because they have so much that they need to do without
Exactly.
realizing that this is human nature. I remember when I was working with a physical therapist that we had on staff, I would see her. She would say, okay, this week I want you to do this, this, and this. Okay. I'd walk out of her, literally, my office is right next door to hers. I would walk out the door to my office, turn around and say, what'd you tell me to do again?
Uh-huh.
And I can't tell you the number of times she goes, wait a minute, hang on. I got to think about that. I forgot two. It's like, we were just talking about it 20 minutes ago. And we're in the
Yeah.
profession. We're in
I was gonna
this.
say, and she can say, "Do a bridge this way," and you've got it. Like, you
Right.
know that.
We know
Your
how, what's
clients are
going on.
like, "What?" Or they get the pamphlet because I know, some of my clients will say, "Oh, I got the pamphlet. Like, here's my handout." And I said,
Yeah.
"Did they go over this with you?" They said, "Well, they did once." That's just the nature of healthcare at the moment. It's tricky that
It's what
way.
it is. So it's our
So,
job to
yeah.
help fine tune that. So I love that you brought that up because yeah, don't make don't make someone that they may love wrong
Right, absolutely.
because that's going to
It's
make you look
it doesn't
bad.
benefit and it doesn't benefit anybody.
Anybody, anybody. And we've all, and I'll be honest, I've done it early in my career when I've looked at things and thought, ugh, why would
What the
they?
heck? What the heck is that? What are they
They
doing
weren't
there?
doing it right with you. I can't believe they taught you to do it this way. No, you don't know how they were taught.
You have
So,
no idea. Yeah. Yeah.
and you don't know how they're going to show your exercises to their spouse later that day.
No, exactly. Like you could be on the receiving end of that same experience because they take your exercise, twist it 30 degrees, and then, teach it to
Yep.
somebody else in a completely not the way that you intended it at all. You have no idea. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So definitely give them homework, have them go over it and go over it regularly. I do. I do. And don't be afraid to change it when they've gotten it down. So these are all things to
And
think about.
yeah, and kind of last thing there is just with all my clients, I'm often just trying to decide what's more beneficial for them at that point in their process. Is it
Mhm.
mobility or is it stability? Sometimes it's both. Sometimes you're going to
Sometimes
work,
both.
parallel, do a little bit of both.
Yep.
Sometimes you're going to focus more on one or the other. Again, I've worked a lot with dancers and gymnasts and things like that. And a lot of times with them, I've got to work on stability because they have the mobility.
Mm.
I've also worked on a whole lot of seniors and others, just ordinary folk, if you will. And then oftentimes they have to work on mobility because they don't even have the mobility to do the stability work well because they're
Yep.
so stiff.
Yep.
So also understanding, I would think of that as a spectrum. Not digital. It's not A or B, but it's something in between. Like, oh, they're a little more on the mobile side. I'm going to give them a little mobility, but I'm going to focus more on stability. Or, ooh, they're really on the stable side. I'm going to focus more on mobility and understanding where on that spectrum they are as well is really important with low back pain.
And it is a sliding scale. You're going to one day they're going to come in and they're going to be great over here that you can work the other side. So that sliding scale, you're going to be moving back and forth. Don't get hung up on just doing one.
No.
It's going to slide back and forth.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we did go in a lot of different directions, but I think we gave you guys some ideas
Yeah.
of things that you can do and some practical ideas. So hopefully you did. And do me a favor in the comments on Instagram or email us. Let us know what you do. What's your favorite spinal mobility exercise? Because I'm always interested because there are some out there that are crazy and some that are really kind of cool that I'm like, oh, I never thought of that before, but I love that. So let us know what you guys are doing. We'd appreciate it. Instagram, it's Moving Convos. And you can always email us at movingcombos@gmail.com. YouTube, you can see us, sort of live and in person here on video each week. So check out under my name, Brian Ritchie, and do hit the like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. It helps us out big time. Also, a lot of the information we talked about sort of in my book. So if you ever want it, you can hit that on Amazon. It's actually cheaper. It's as cheap on Amazon as what I pay for it. So trust me, it's on sale right now. So go for it. And yeah, I think that's it for today. What do you think?
I think that sounds good. We're going
All
to go
right.
on to more practical programming next time, how to progress clients, some of the kinds of things. But enjoy the week, and we look forward to seeing you later.
All right. We'll see y'all next week.